The flashing red and blue lights carved through the twilight like knives, tearing apart what had been a peaceful Thursday evening. Emily Carter stood in her driveway, holding a plate of cookies she'd just baked for the block party, watching two patrol cars pull up to her curb. Behind her, conversations died. Grills hissed. Someone's child asked why the police were there. Margaret Doyle stood across the street, arms folded, phone still in her hand, satisfaction spreading across her face like oil on water. The officers approached, hands near their belts, scanning Emily like she was a problem that needed solving. One of them opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. His eyes caught something. His partner saw it too. Both men went rigid, their entire posture shifting in a single breath. The taller officer's hand moved, not to his weapon, but to his chest, almost like a salute he barely caught himself from giving. "Ma'am," he said, voice dropping an octave. Are you Lieutenant Carter?" Margaret's smile cracked. "If you want to see how a neighborhood's worst nightmare becomes their greatest reckoning, stay with me until the very end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels." The moving truck had pulled away 3 hours ago, leaving Emily's duplex half empty and echoing. She'd unpacked the essentials, bed, coffee maker, the framed photo of her unit she kept face down in a drawer, and called it a day. Ridgewood Grove wasn't much. A cluster of townhomes and small houses tucked into the hills outside Ashford, Virginia, where people knew each other's business and liked it that way. Emily had chosen it because it was quiet, because nobody here would know her name. She was 34 and tired in a way sleep didn't fix. The ER at Riverside General paid well enough. Night shifts, mostly. Trauma cases, overdoses, the occasional stabbing. Nothing she couldn't handle. She'd seen worse. Done worse. Saved people in places where the ceiling was canvas and the floor was mud and the only light came from burning vehicles outside. But that was before. That was Lieutenant Emily Carter, combat medic, 3 tours, more commendations than she bothered to count. This was just Emily. Civilian, nurse, neighbor. She wanted it that way. The first week passed without incident. She waved at people. They waved back. A man named Ron 2 doors down helped her carry in a bookshelf. A younger couple with a toddler smiled from their porch. Normal. Easy. Forgettable. Then came Margaret Doyle. Margaret lived in the largest house on the cul-de-sac, a brick colonial with shutters she repainted every spring and a lawn that looked like it had been trimmed with scissors. She was 62, widowed, and ran the neighborhood watch with the enthusiasm of a general planning an invasion. Emily met her on a Saturday morning while watering the sad little rosebush the previous tenant had left behind. "You must be the new girl," Margaret said, not quite smiling. She wore white capris and a sun visor, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Emily Carter." She set down the hose and extended a hand. Margaret took it briefly, the way you'd touch something you weren't sure was clean. "Margaret Doyle, I've been here 19 years. Welcome to the neighborhood." Her eyes traveled over Emily's yard, lingering on the unpainted fence and the recycling bin that hadn't been put away yet. "We keep things neat around here. Standards, keeps property values up." "Of course," Emily said. "There's a homeowners meeting next month. I'll send you the details." Margaret's gaze sharpened. "You work?" "Nurse, ER, night shift mostly." "Oh." Margaret's mouth twitched. "Well, we don't get much trouble here, but it's good to know we have medical nearby. Just keep the noise down when you come home, would you? Some of us are light sleepers." Emily hadn't made noise. She came home at 7 in the morning, showered, slept. But she nodded anyway. "No problem." Margaret left without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, Emily decided to try. She wasn't good at this, at being the friendly neighbor, at small talk, at pretending she cared about lawn care, but she knew how to follow protocol. You integrate, you adapt, you don't stand out. So she printed flyers on her ancient printer, bought burgers and hot dogs, set up a folding table in her backyard, and invited the block. Ron showed up first, carrying a 6-pack and a bag of chips. "Didn't think you were the party type," he said, grinning. "I'm not," Emily admitted, "but I thought I should try." The young couple came next, Amy and Derek, with their son Caleb, who immediately ran toward the small plastic pool Emily had inflated. A few others trickled in. People were polite, curious. They asked the usual questions: where she was from, what brought her to Ridgewood, whether she liked it so far. Emily gave the usual answers, the ones that didn't mean anything. She'd gotten good at that. Margaret arrived last, carrying a fruit tray that looked store-bought but had been transferred to a nice dish. She surveyed the yard like a health inspector, taking in the mismatched chairs, the uneven grass, the string lights Emily had hung that morning. "This is sweet," Margaret said, in a tone that meant the opposite. "Very casual. Just wanted people to feel comfortable," Emily said. Margaret set down the tray, adjusted it twice, then turned to the others. "Well, isn't this nice? Emily here works nights, at the hospital. Very demanding, I'm sure." It wasn't a compliment. Amy, holding Caleb on her hip, smiled at Emily. "That's amazing. ER nurses are heroes." Margaret's expression tightened. "Oh, I'm sure it's rewarding, though I imagine it's hard to keep up with things when you're sleeping all day." Ron caught Emily's eye and shook his head slightly, a warning. She saw it, filed it away. The party went fine. People ate, talked, left. Margaret lingered, helping clean up in a way that felt like surveillance. She picked up a paper plate, examined it, dropped it in the trash. "Emily, if you ever need help with the yard, there's a service most of us use. Keeps everything uniform, cohesive." "I'll think about it," Emily said. Margaret smiled. "Good. We've worked hard to build a community here. It'd be a shame to see it change." After she left, Emily stood alone in her yard, staring at the string lights swaying in the breeze. She knew what that word meant. Change. It was code. It always had been. She went inside and didn't think about it. But Margaret did. Over the next 2 weeks, small things started happening. A note slipped under Emily's door about her trash bins being out too long. They'd been out 20 minutes past collection. A complaint filed with the HOA about her car being parked slightly over the line in her own driveway. An email chain Emily wasn't included in, where Margaret suggested implementing quiet hours to accommodate residents with unconventional schedules. Emily ignored it. She'd dealt with worse. Commanding officers who hated her because she was young, because she was a woman, because she'd earned her rank faster than they had. Soldiers who questioned her until the first mortar hit, and suddenly she was the only person they trusted. She could handle Margaret Doyle. Then came the night shift from hell. A multi-car pile-up on Route 29. 6 patients, 2 critical. Emily worked 14 hours straight, hands slick with blood, voice steady as she called out orders, held compressions, stitched what could be stitched, and made the calls that couldn't. They saved 4, lost 2. She walked out into the morning light, feeling hollowed out, her scrubs stained, her mind still hearing the flatline. She drove home on autopilot, pulled into her driveway, sat in the car for 10 minutes because she didn't have the energy to move. When she finally went inside, she didn't shower, didn't eat, just collapsed on the couch and let the silence take her under. She woke to pounding on the door. It took her a moment to orient, late afternoon, golden light slanting through the blinds. The pounding came again, harder. She stood, muscles aching, and opened the door. Margaret. 2 other neighbors Emily vaguely recognized. A man in his 50s named Paul, and a woman named Linda who always wore workout clothes but never seemed to work out. "We need to talk," Margaret said. Emily blinked, still half asleep. "About what?" "About your car." "What about it?" "You left it running all night," Paul said, arms folded. "The engine was on until noon. Do you know how inconsiderate that is?" Emily looked past them at her car. It was off. It had been off since she got home. We heard it," Linda cut in. "It was idling for hours. The exhaust smell woke me up." Emily's mind, still slow from exhaustion, tried to process this. She'd turned the car off. She always turned the car off. But 3 people were standing on her porch, insisting otherwise, and she was too tired to fight. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It won't happen again." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "This is becoming a pattern, Emily. The noise, the mess, now this. We've tried to be welcoming, but there are standards. I said I'm sorry. Maybe this neighborhood isn't the right fit for you." The words hung there, sharp and deliberate. Emily felt something shift inside her, something old and cold she'd buried deep. She'd heard versions of this before. In briefings where officers suggested she transfer. In hospitals where administrators implied she'd be happier somewhere else. In 100 small, polite ways, people had told her she didn't belong. She met Margaret's gaze and held it. "I'll be more careful." Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. Whatever she'd expected, tears, anger, capitulation, she wasn't getting it. "See that you are," she said finally, and turned away. Emily closed the door and leaned against it, eyes shut. She'd left the army to get away from this. The constant proving, the endless tests, the unspoken rules that applied to her differently than to everyone else. She'd thought civilian life would be simpler, quieter, a place where she could just exist without having to defend her right to do so. She'd been wrong. That night, she went back to work. Another shift, another parade of broken bodies and shattered lives. A kid with a gunshot wound, an elderly woman who'd fallen down the stairs, a man having his third heart attack in as many years who looked at Emily and said, "You gonna save me again, Angel?" She did. She always did. When her shift ended, she sat in the break room and stared at her phone. No messages, no calls. The kind of silence that used to feel like peace and now just felt empty. She thought about calling her old unit, the guys she'd served with, but they were scattered now. Different bases, different lives. Some dead, some married, some just gone. She drove home as the sun came up, exhausted again, and found Margaret standing in her driveway. "We need to talk," Margaret said. "I'm tired. This won't take long. I've spoken with the HOA. And we've decided, given the recent issues, it would be best if you attended a neighborhood mediation session." Emily stared at her. "A what?" "A mediation, to discuss your behavior and how we can all move forward." Margaret's smile was thin, victorious. "It's voluntary, of course, but I think it would be in your best interest." "What behavior?" Emily's voice was flat, controlled. "I work. I sleep. I don't bother anyone. You've had multiple complaints." "From you." Margaret's expression hardened. "From concerned residents. And frankly, Emily, your attitude right now isn't helping." Emily wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. Instead, she said, "I'll think about it," and walked past Margaret into her house. She didn't sleep that day. Couldn't. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about leaving. Packing up, finding somewhere else, starting over again. She'd done it before. After her first tour, after her second, after the medical discharge that ended her career. She was good at starting over, good at disappearing. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the part of her that had dragged wounded soldiers through minefields and refused to leave anyone behind, the part that didn't know how to quit. She decided to stay. The next week, she hosted another barbecue. Smaller this time. Just Ron, Amy, Derek, and a few others who seemed genuinely friendly. No Margaret. Emily grilled chicken, poured drinks, and tried to remember how to be a person who wasn't always waiting for the next crisis. "You doing okay?" Ron asked, nursing a beer. "Margaret's been a lot." "I've handled worse," Emily said. "I bet you have." He hesitated. "Look, I don't know your story, and I'm not asking, but you don't have to prove anything to her, or to anyone here." Emily nodded, but didn't answer, because he was wrong. She did have to prove something. She had to prove she deserved to exist in this space, in this neighborhood, in this version of herself that wasn't a soldier anymore. That night, after everyone left, Emily stood in her backyard and looked at the lights she'd hung. They swayed in the breeze, casting soft shadows on the grass. For a moment, she let herself imagine this could work, that she could be normal here, that Margaret would move on, find someone else to target, and Emily could fade into the background the way she wanted. Then her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You don't belong here. Leave before we make you." Emily stared at it, her pulse steady, her mind already running scenarios. She didn't respond, didn't acknowledge it, just set the phone down and went inside. She knew what came next. She'd seen it before, in different contexts, different uniforms. The escalation, the push, the moment when words turned into action and you had to decide whether to stand or run. Emily Carter had never been good at running. 3 days later, she threw another gathering. This time, she made sure it was visible, loud enough to be heard, public enough to be noticed. She invited everyone on the block, even Margaret, especially Margaret, because if this was going to happen, whatever this was, she wanted witnesses. People came, more than she expected. The yard filled with neighbors, music, laughter. Emily moved through the crowd, playing host, watching Margaret watch her from across the fence. At 8:30, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the first siren cut through the air. Then the second. 2 patrol cars, lights blazing, pulling onto the quiet street like an invasion force. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Emily set down the tongs she'd been holding and watched the officers approach, her face calm, her heart a steady drumbeat. This was it. The move Margaret had been building toward. The public humiliation. The thing that would finally push Emily out. The officers stepped onto her lawn, scanning the crowd. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, locked eyes with Emily. His expression was professional, detached. He opened his mouth to speak and froze. His partner saw it too, whatever it was. Both men went still, their entire demeanor shifting like a switch had been flipped. The tall officer's hand moved instinctive, almost a salute before he caught himself. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was different now, quieter, respectful. "Lieutenant Carter?" Emily didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, backlit by string lights, as the weight of her past settled over the present like a shroud. Margaret's face went white, and Emily knew, without a doubt, that everything was about to change. The taller officer's face had gone through about 3 different expressions in the span of a breath. Confusion, recognition, then something close to respect. He straightened his posture without meaning to, muscle memory overriding training. His partner, younger, maybe late 20s, looked between them like he'd walked into the middle of a conversation he didn't understand. "Lieutenant Carter," the tall officer said again, and this time it wasn't a question. Emily met his gaze, her face giving away nothing. Around them, the party had gone silent. Ron held his beer halfway to his mouth. Amy had pulled Caleb close. Margaret stood frozen near the fence, her phone still clutched in her hand like evidence she suddenly wanted to hide. "Officer," Emily said, her voice level. Not warm, not cold, just present. The tall officer seemed to realize where he was, what this looked like. He glanced at his partner, then back at Emily. "Ma'am, we received a call about a disturbance. Noise complaint. Possible—" He stopped, his eyes scanning the quiet gathering, the string lights, the grill still smoking with half-cooked burgers. Nothing here warranted 2 patrol cars. "Possible what?" Emily asked. The officer cleared his throat. "Suspicious activity. Someone in the crowd made a noise that might have been a laugh or a cough." Emily didn't look away from the officer. "Do you see suspicious activity, officer?" "Brennan. Officer Brennan." He shifted his weight. "No, ma'am, I don't." His partner finally found his voice. "We still need to file a report. Someone called it in." Emily's eyes moved to Margaret for the first time since the police arrived. Margaret had taken a step back, her face pale under the porch light, but her chin was still up, defiant. Their eyes met across the yard, and something passed between them, a challenge, a dare, a line drawn in invisible ink. "I called," Margaret said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "because there are noise ordinances in this neighborhood, and some of us have to work in the morning." "It's 8:30, Ron said from somewhere behind Emily. Margaret ignored him. "And there's been ongoing issues with this residence, multiple complaints. The HOA has documentation." "Ma'am," Officer Brennan cut in, and his tone had shifted now, formal and final. "Unless there's an actual disturbance, we can't—" "She doesn't belong here," Margaret said, and the words came out sharper than she probably intended. Louder. "She's been causing problems since she moved in, and tonight she's deliberately—" "Doesn't belong?" The younger officer, his nameplate said Torres, looked genuinely confused. "It's her property." "You don't understand," Margaret insisted, but she was losing ground and everyone could hear it. "The way she conducts herself, the hours she keeps, the lack of respect for community standards." "Community standards," Emily repeated, and her voice was so quiet people leaned in to hear it. "Is that what we're calling it?" Margaret's mouth opened, closed. She seemed to realize she'd gone too far but couldn't figure out how to walk it back. Officer Brennan looked at Emily, and there was something in his expression, apology, maybe, or understanding. "Ma'am, if you'd like to file a counter-report for false emergency calls, you have that right." Emily held his gaze for a long moment. She could do it. Press charges, make it official, turn this into exactly the kind of public spectacle Margaret had been trying to create. But it would also mean questions. Attention. People digging into who she was, what she'd done, why two police officers treated her like someone they'd been trained to salute. "No," she said finally. "I don't think that'll be necessary." Brennan nodded slowly. "Understood. We'll file this as unfounded and be on our way." He glanced at Margaret. "Ma'am, false reports tie up emergency resources. I'd suggest being certain before making another call." It wasn't a threat exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. The officers turned to leave, but Torres paused, looking back at Emily. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "my brother served in the 173rd. He talked about you once. Said you pulled him out of a burning vehicle outside Kandahar." Emily's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "What's his name?" "Marcus Torres, specialist." "I remember him," Emily said. "How's he doing?" "Good. Really good. He's got 2 kids now." Torres smiled slightly. "He's alive because of you." The weight of those words settled over the yard like fog. People were staring at Emily differently now, recalculating who she was, what she'd done. Margaret's face had gone from pale to ashen. The officers left. The patrol cars pulled away, lights fading into the distance. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the soft hiss of the grill and someone's wind chimes down the street. Then Amy said, "Well, that was something," and nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. But the party was over. People made excuses. Early mornings, babysitters, tired kids. They filed out in small groups, some stopping to squeeze Emily's shoulder or murmur support, others just slipping away into the darkness. A woman Emily had never spoken to before, maybe 70, with silver hair and kind eyes, paused on her way out. "My son was Navy," she said quietly. "I know what it costs. Thank you for your service." Emily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Within 15 minutes, the yard was empty except for Emily, Ron, and Margaret, who still stood by the fence like she'd grown roots. The string lights swayed in the breeze, casting moving shadows across the grass. A paper plate tumbled across the lawn, caught against a chair leg. Ron started picking up cups. "You want help cleaning up?" "I've got it," Emily said. He nodded, set the cups down, and walked over to Margaret instead. Emily couldn't hear what he said, but his voice was low and tight, and Margaret's face went from pale to red. She said something back, sharp and defensive. Ron shook his head and walked away, pausing next to Emily. "Whatever happens next," he said, "you've got people on your side, don't forget that." Then he was gone too. Margaret stayed. Emily began folding chairs, stacking them against the house. She moved methodically, muscle memory from a dozen field operations where you packed up fast and left nothing behind. Margaret watched her for maybe 2 minutes before she finally spoke. "What are you?" Emily set down a chair and looked at her. "Those officers," Margaret continued, her voice shaking slightly. "They recognized you. They treated you like what? Like you're somebody." Emily almost smiled. Almost. "I'm a nurse, Margaret. You know that." "You're not just a nurse." Margaret took a step closer, and Emily could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the fear mixing with something else. Anger, maybe, or humiliation. "What did you do? Before? Does it matter?" "Yes," Margaret said, and there was real emotion in it now, raw and desperate. "Yes, it matters. Because you came here pretending to be normal, pretending to be just another neighbor, and you're not. You're something else, and you let me—" She stopped, breathing hard. "Let you what?" Emily asked softly. "Harass me? Try to run me out? Call the police on me for having a barbecue? I didn't know." "You didn't care to know," Emily corrected. "You saw what you wanted to see. Someone you could push around, someone who wouldn't push back." Margaret's hands were shaking. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold, even though the night was warm. "This isn't over." Emily picked up another chair. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think it is." Margaret left, her footsteps quick and angry on the pavement. Emily heard a door slam somewhere down the street. She finished cleaning alone, bagging trash, dousing the grill, taking down the string lights she'd hung with such stupid, fragile hope. When everything was packed away and the yard looked like nothing had happened, she went inside and sat on her couch in the dark. Her phone buzzed, A text from a number she hadn't seen in 3 years. Heard you had some excitement tonight. You okay? Emily stared at it. Officer Brennan must have recognized her name, run it through whatever system they used, and someone had made a call. The message was from Captain Sarah Vickers, her former commanding officer, the woman who'd pinned her medals and signed her discharge papers and told her she'd always have a place to come back to. Emily typed, "I'm fine." The response came immediately. "You sure?" Because Brennan said it looked messy, just neighborhood drama. Emily, "Really? I've got it handled." There was a long pause, then, "Call me if that changes. I mean it." Emily set the phone down without responding. She didn't want to explain, didn't want to talk about Margaret or the HOA or the slow, grinding pressure of trying to be civilian in a world that kept reminding her she wasn't. She just wanted to sleep, but sleep didn't come. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thought about the look on Margaret's face when the officers recognized her. The shock, the fear, the recalculation of power dynamics that had seemed so certain 5 minutes earlier. Emily had seen that look before, on the faces of officers who'd underestimated her, soldiers who'd assumed she couldn't handle the pressure, bureaucrats who'd tried to push her out. It never got old exactly, but it never got satisfying either, because it meant she'd had to prove herself again, and she was so tired of proving herself. The next morning, Emily woke to find an envelope shoved under her door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in neat, impersonal font. Notice of HOA violation. Resident, Emily Carter. Violation, disturbance of peace, failure to maintain property standards, harassment of neighbors. Fine, $500 appeal. Deadline, 10 days. Emily read it twice, her coffee going cold in her hand. Harassment of neighbors. They were actually claiming she had harassed them. The audacity of it would have been funny if it weren't so calculated. Margaret wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. Emily called the HOA office at 9 sharp. A woman with a bored voice answered on the third ring. "I received a violation notice," Emily said. "I'd like to appeal." "Name?" "Emily Carter, 47 Ridgewood Grove." A pause. Typing. "I see the notice. The appeal hearing is scheduled for next Thursday, 7 p.m. at the community center. You'll have 10 minutes to present your case." "Who filed the complaint?" "That information is confidential." "It was Margaret Doyle," Emily said flatly. Another pause. "I can't confirm that." "You don't have to." Emily hung up. She went to work that night with the notice folded in her pocket like a weight. The ER was slow for a Friday, which was almost worse. It gave her too much time to think. She ran through arguments in her head, practiced staying calm, reminded herself this was just bureaucracy, just another system to navigate. She'd dealt with worse. Court-martials, field tribunals, officers who wanted her gone and weren't shy about saying it. But this felt different, smaller, pettier. And somehow that made it worse. Around 3 a.m., they got a call. Multi-vehicle accident on the highway. 3 incoming, possible 4th DOA. Emily snapped into focus, her mind clearing like someone had flipped a switch. This she knew. This she could do. The first patient came in seizing, his body jerking against the restraints. The second had a punctured lung, sucking chest wound, blood bubbling from between his ribs. The third was a kid, maybe 19, screaming for his mother, his leg bent at an angle that made the attending look away. Emily moved between them, calling orders, starting IVs, holding pressure on wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. She saved 2 out of 3, lost the kid despite everything, massive internal bleeding, liver laceration, nothing they could have done, and walked out into the parking lot at dawn with his blood still under her fingernails. She sat in her car and let herself shake for exactly 2 minutes. Then she pulled herself together and drove home. Ron was waiting by her driveway. "Jesus," Emily said, stopping short. "You scared me." "Sorry." He looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, coffee cup in his hand that was probably cold. "I wanted to catch you before you went home." "Why?" He pulled out his phone, scrolled, and handed it to her. It was a group chat. The neighborhood thread Emily had never been added to. She scrolled through the messages, her stomach tightening with each line. Margaret. She threatened me after you all left last night, Paul. What did she say? Margaret. That I didn't know who I was dealing with. Very aggressive. I felt unsafe. Linda. Should we call the police again? Margaret. I don't think they'll help. She has connections. Did you see how those officers acted? Paul. What kind of connections? Margaret. I'm looking into it, but I think we need to be careful. This woman is dangerous, Linda. Maybe we should talk to the board. Margaret. Already filed a formal complaint. We have a right to feel safe in our own homes. Emily handed the phone back. Dangerous. It's bullshit, Ron said. Everyone knows it's bullshit, but she's good at this. She's done it before. Done what? Run people out. Ron leaned against her car, exhausted. There was a family 2 years ago. Nice people, from Iran. The husband was a professor. The wife taught piano. Margaret started the same way. Little complaints, little violations, then it escalated. Rumors about them being connected to terrorism. Total garbage, but people got nervous. The wife started getting followed to her car. Someone spray-painted their garage. They left after 6 months. Emily's jaw tightened. And nobody stopped her? Nobody wanted the trouble. Margaret's lived here forever. She knows everyone, serves on every committee, throws money at every cause, and most people just keep their heads down. It's easier. He looked at Emily. But you're not keeping your head down. Should I? No, Ron said firmly. Hell no. But you should know what you're up against. I appreciate the warning. It's not just a warning. Ron straightened up. Whatever you need, witness statements, character references, documentation, I'm here. So is Amy. So are a few others. Emily felt something loosen in her chest just slightly. Thanks. For what it's worth, Ron said, I'm glad you're staying. This neighborhood needs someone who doesn't bend. After he left, Emily sat in her car and pulled up the HOA bylaws on her phone. She read through them carefully, looking for leverage, for loopholes, for anything that might help. What she found was worse than she expected. The HOA board had broad discretionary powers. They could fine her, place liens on her property, even force a sale if violations continued. And the board was made up of 5 people, 3 of whom Margaret had campaigned for personally. This wasn't a fair fight, but Emily had never been in a fair fight. She spent the next week preparing. She documented everything, the timeline of Margaret's complaints, the police report from the barbecue, the text messages, the group chat screenshots Ron had sent her. She contacted a lawyer, got a consultation, learned exactly what her rights were. She practiced her statement until it was clean, factual, and impossible to refute. At work, she kept her head down and did her job. Saved lives, lost some, went through the motions, but her mind was always elsewhere, running scenarios, planning contingencies. A few of her coworkers noticed. You okay? Janet, one of the senior nurses, asked during a break. You seem distracted. Just some stuff at home, Emily said. Anything I can help with? Emily almost laughed. Unless you know a good way to deal with a vindictive neighbor, probably not. Janet raised an eyebrow. Actually, my sister's a real estate attorney. Deals with HOA disputes all the time. Want her number? Emily took it, made the call. Spent an hour on the phone learning exactly how ugly this could get and what her options were. By the time she hung up, she had a strategy. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. The night of the hearing, she dressed carefully. Slacks, a button-down shirt, her hair pulled back. Professional, but not intimidating. Civilian, but not weak. She walked into the community center at 6:55 and found the room already full. Margaret sat at a table in the front, flanked by Paul and Linda. Both of them looked uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else but had been conscripted. The rest of the board, an older man named George who owned a car dealership, and a woman named Patricia who taught elementary school, sat behind a folding table that was trying very hard to look official. Rows of chairs faced them, most filled with neighbors. Some looked curious. Some looked uncomfortable. A few met Emily's eyes and nodded. Emily sat in the front row and waited. At 7 sharp, George cleared his throat. We're here to review the appeal of Emily Carter regarding violations filed on, he squinted at his papers, April 18th. Ms. Carter, you have 10 minutes to present your case. Emily stood. Thank you. I'll need less than that. She laid out the facts. The timeline of complaints, each one documented with dates and details. The police report stating no disturbance was found. The text messages. The group chat screenshots showing Margaret's pattern of escalation and false accusations. She spoke clearly, without emotion, letting the evidence do the work. She didn't mention her military service, didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. When she finished, the room was silent. George looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Patricia was frowning at her notes. Margaret's face had gone red, her hands clenched on the table so hard her knuckles were white. "These are serious allegations," George said finally. "Yes," Emily agreed. "That's why I'm appealing." Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd. She's twisting everything. I filed legitimate complaints about legitimate violations. You called the police claiming I was harassing you." Emily cut in, her voice still calm. "While you were actively spreading rumors that I'm dangerous. Which is it, Margaret? Am I a threat, or am I a victim you need protection from?" "You're neither," Margaret snapped. "You're a manipulator who came into this neighborhood pretending to be something you're not. And what am I?" "I don't know." Margaret's voice cracked, and there was something desperate in it now. "But those officers knew you. They treated you like military, like you had rank. So what are you hiding, Emily?" The room went very quiet. People leaned forward in their seats. Emily could feel everyone watching her, waiting. She could deflect, change the subject, keep her past buried where she'd tried to leave it. But something in Margaret's face, the desperation, the need to be right, to be in control, made her reconsider. "You want to know what I am?" Emily said softly. "Fine. I'm a former Army combat medic, lieutenant. I served 3 tours in active war zones. I ran trauma teams under fire in places where the casualty rate was 80%. I saved lives in conditions you can't imagine, and when I came home, I wanted to be normal. I wanted to be just another neighbor. But you couldn't let me have that, could you?" Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. "You saw someone you didn't understand," Emily continued, her voice still quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "And instead of asking questions, you attacked. You filed complaints, spread rumors, tried to run me out. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I didn't fit your idea of who belongs here." "That's not—" Margaret started. "It is," Ron said from the back of the room. Several heads turned. "It's exactly what happened. We all saw it." Amy stood next, holding Caleb. "I saw it too. From the beginning." Then Derek. Then 3 other people Emily barely knew. Then Janet from work, who Emily hadn't even realized was there. One by one, they spoke up, and Margaret shrank with each voice, her certainty crumbling like sand. George cleared his throat. "I think we've heard enough. The board will deliberate and issue a decision within 48 hours. This hearing is adjourned." People filed out slowly, some stopping to speak with Emily, others avoiding eye contact with Margaret. Paul and Linda left quickly, not looking at anyone. Emily gathered her papers and headed for the door, exhausted and wired at the same time. She was halfway to her car when she heard footsteps behind her. Margaret. "You think you've won," Margaret said, her voice shaking. Emily turned. Under the parking lot lights, Margaret looked older than she had before. Smaller. This wasn't a competition. Everything's a competition. And you might have fooled them tonight, but I know what you are. You're a liar. You came here hiding who you were, and now you want to play victim? "I came here to live quietly," Emily said. "You're the one who made this a war." Margaret stepped closer, and Emily could see tears in her eyes now. Whether from rage or fear or something else, she couldn't tell. Her mascara was smudged. "You don't scare me." "I'm not trying to scare you." "Yes, you are. With your military background and your connections and your... Margaret's voice broke. "You think you're better than us, than me." Emily felt a flash of something like pity. "I think you're scared of people you can't control, and I think you've been getting away with this for too long." "We'll see," Margaret said, but there was no strength in it. She walked away quickly, her shoulders rigid, and Emily heard her car start and peel out of the parking lot faster than was safe. Emily got in her own car and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing. She should have felt victorious, vindicated, but all she felt was tired. The decision came 46 hours later. An email from the HOA board. After careful review of all evidence presented, The violations filed against Emily Carter at 47 Ridgewood Grove are dismissed in their entirety. No fines will be assessed, no further action required. The board reminds all residents that false or malicious complaints undermine community trust and may result in consequences for the filer. It was over. She'd won. Emily read the email 3 times, waiting for a relief that didn't quite come. She'd won the battle, sure, but Margaret was still out there, still angry, still convinced she was right. When Emily checked her mailbox that afternoon, she found something else. Another envelope, this one hand-delivered, no postage. Inside was a photocopy of an old newspaper clipping, the edges slightly blurred from multiple generations of copying. The headline was circled in red marker, Army Medic under investigation for unauthorized medical procedures. The article was from 6 years ago, from a paper in North Carolina near Fort Bragg. Emily's hands went cold as she read it. The details were vague: an investigation, allegations of performing procedures outside her scope of practice, possible court-martial. The article didn't mention the outcome because the outcome had come 3 months later, buried in a different paper on page 12. Below the clipping, in handwritten block letters, "Everyone will know what you really are." Emily stood in her driveway, holding the paper, and felt the world tilt sideways, because Margaret had gone digging, and she'd found the one thing Emily had spent 4 years trying to bury, the thing that had ended her career, the thing that had almost destroyed her. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. "Emily Carter?" A man's voice, professional, slightly formal. "Yes. This is David Harrison, Ashford Tribune. I'm doing a story on local veterans, and someone suggested I reach out to you. I understand you served as a combat medic." Emily's stomach dropped. "Who told you that?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but I'd love to get your side of the story, particularly regarding the incident at—" Emily hung up. She went inside, locked the door, and sat on her couch with the clipping still in her hand. Her phone rang again. Different number. She didn't answer. A text came through from Ron. "Reporters have been calling around the neighborhood asking about you. What's going on?" Margaret hadn't just found the article. She'd contacted the press. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Emily's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She powered it off completely and sat in the silence, the newspaper clipping still in her hand. The paper was cheap, the kind that yellowed fast, and someone had handled it enough that the edges were soft. Margaret had kept this. Saved it. Waited for the right moment to use it. The investigation had been hell. 3 months of her life spent answering the same questions over and over while her unit deployed without her. The allegations were simple. She'd performed emergency procedures outside her scope of practice. Specifically, she'd done field surgery, actual cutting, actual suturing of internal organs, on soldiers who would have died waiting for a surgeon to arrive. She'd saved 11 lives doing it. The Army didn't care about the lives. They cared about protocol. In the end, they'd cleared her, quietly. No fanfare, no apology, just a note in her file and a suggestion that maybe she'd be happier in a different role. She'd finished her tour, accepted her discharge, and buried the whole thing so deep she'd almost convinced herself it hadn't happened. Almost. Now Margaret was digging it up, and Emily had about 12 hours before it became the only thing anyone knew about her. She needed to move first. Emily powered her phone back on and called Captain Vickers. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. "Carter, I was wondering when you'd call." "You heard?" "Brennan mentioned something. Then I got a call from a reporter asking about your service record." Vickers paused. "Want to tell me what's happening?" Emily gave her the short version. Margaret, the harassment, the HOA hearing, the newspaper clipping. Vickers listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Emily had always appreciated about her. "So she's trying to burn you," Vickers said when Emily finished. "Yeah. With a story that's 6 years old and ended with you being cleared. Most people won't read that far." "No," Vickers agreed. "They won't. They'll see investigation and unauthorized procedures and fill in the rest themselves." Another pause. "What do you need?" "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do. You always know. You're just deciding whether to ask." Emily closed her eyes. "I need the full record. The investigation file, the clearance letter, everything. Documented proof that I was exonerated. I can have that to you by tomorrow morning. And I need you to make some calls. If reporters are digging, they're going to find the court-martial paperwork. I need someone who can explain what actually happened. I'll do better than that, Vickers said. I'll come down myself. Where are you? Sarah, you don't have to... You pulled my husband out of a vehicle that was on fire. He's alive because you ignored orders and ran into an active firefight. So yeah, Emily, I do have to. Vickers' voice softened slightly. Besides, I've been looking for an excuse to knock some civilian sense into you. Sounds like now's a good time. Emily felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm going to show up and tell you everything you're doing wrong. I'd expect nothing less. After she hung up, Emily sat for a moment thinking. Then she opened her laptop and started writing. Not a defense. She was done defending herself. A statement. Clear, factual, unapologetic. She wrote for an hour, deleted half of it, rewrote it, deleted more. By the time she finished, it was 3 pages and said exactly what needed to be said. Then she sent it to Ron, Amy, Derek, and Janet with a simple message. This is what happened. You'll probably hear a different version tomorrow. I wanted you to hear mine first. She didn't wait for responses, just closed the laptop and tried to sleep. Her alarm went off at 6 a.m. She'd gotten maybe 2 hours, her dreams full of burning vehicles and screaming soldiers, and Margaret's face superimposed over all of it. She showered, dressed, made coffee she didn't drink, and checked her phone. 17 missed calls, 32 texts. Most from numbers she didn't recognize, a few from neighbors. One from the hospital asking if she was available for a shift tonight, and one from Ron. Meeting at my place. 8 a.m. You need to be here. Emily arrived at 7:55. Ron's house was small, neat, the kind of place that always smelled like coffee and old wood. He opened the door before she could knock. Living room, he said. We've got about 15 people. Emily stepped inside and found her neighbors packed into Ron's space like they were planning a revolution. Amy and Derek sat on the couch. Janet stood by the window. A few others Emily recognized from the HOA hearing filled the remaining chairs and floor space. They all looked up when she entered. Okay, Ron said, closing the door. Everyone's seen the article by now? Heads nodded. Someone held up their phone showing the Ashford Tribune website. The headline read, Local nurse's troubled military past raises questions. Emily's stomach turned, but she kept her face neutral. It's a hit piece, Amy said flatly. They buried the exoneration in paragraph 12 and spent the whole article making it sound like she got away with something. That's the point, Emily said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Margaret didn't leak this to inform people. She leaked it to destroy my credibility. It's working, Derek said, not unkindly. The neighborhood chat's blowing up. Half the people think you're dangerous. The other half don't know what to think. So we fix it, Ron said. We tell people the truth. Won't matter, Emily said. People believe what they want to believe. And right now, Margaret's given them permission to believe I'm the problem. Then what do we do? Janet asked. Emily looked around the room. These people didn't owe her anything. Most of them barely knew her. But they were here anyway, packed into Ron's living room at 8 in the morning, ready to fight for someone who'd been their neighbor for less than 2 months. You don't do anything, Emily said. This is my fight. Bullshit, Amy said, and several people nodded. She's been poisoning this neighborhood for years. You're just the latest target. If we don't stop her now, she'll do it again. Amy's right, Ron said. This isn't about you anymore. It's about whether we're the kind of community that lets people get destroyed by rumors. Emily wanted to argue, wanted to tell them to stay out of it, protect themselves, keep their heads down. But she looked at their faces and saw the same thing she'd seen in her unit all those years ago, people who'd decided to stand, consequences be damned. Okay, she said finally. Then here's what we do. The plan was simple. Ron would organize a community meeting, not an HOA hearing, just neighbors talking. Amy would reach out to people directly, one-on-one, with the facts. Derek would monitor the online chatter and push back against misinformation. Janet would contact her sister, the real estate attorney, and start documenting everything for a potential harassment lawsuit. And Emily would wait for Captain Vickers. Vickers arrived at noon, driving a black pickup truck that had seen better days. She stepped out wearing jeans and a marine sweatshirt, her husband's, Emily recognized, and aviator sunglasses that she pushed up into her short gray hair when she saw Emily. You look like hell, Vickers said. Thanks. When's the last time you slept? Thursday. Jesus, Carter. Vickers pulled a folder from her truck. Let's go inside. They sat at Emily's kitchen table, and Vickers spread out documents like a general planning a campaign. The investigation file, the clearance letter, witness statements from 11 soldiers whose lives Emily had saved, commendations, awards, a letter from a 3-star general praising her exceptional courage under fire and unwavering commitment to preserving life. This, Vickers said, tapping the general's letter, is what actually happened. You didn't break protocol because you felt like it. You broke it because soldiers were dying and you were the only one there who could save them. The Army didn't see it that way. Some people in the Army didn't see it that way. The investigation cleared you. That's what matters. Vickers leaned back. Now tell me about this Margaret woman. Emily did. Everything, from the first meeting to the newspaper clipping. Vickers listened, her expression getting darker. She's scared, Vickers said when Emily finished. Of what? Of you. Of what you represent. You're everything she's not. Capable, competent, respected by people she can't control. So she's trying to tear you down before you can threaten her position. Vickers smiled, and it wasn't friendly. I've seen it 1,000 times. Usually in officers who peaked too early and spent the rest of their careers protecting their territory. How'd you handle it? Outlasted them, outperformed them, made them irrelevant. Vickers tapped the documents again. And when necessary, I reminded people who they were actually dealing with. I don't want a war. Too late. She started one. Now you have to decide if you're going to fight it or let her win. Vickers met Emily's eyes. What do you want, Emily? Really? Emily thought about it. What did she want? To disappear? To move again, start over somewhere else where nobody knew her name? She'd done that before. It hadn't worked. I want to stay, she said quietly. I want to live here without having to prove I deserve it every single day. Then we make that happen. The community meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community center. Emily spent the afternoon preparing, going over her statement, reviewing the documents Vickers had brought. At 6:30, her phone rang. Ron. You need to see this, he said. Emily drove to the community center and found a crowd already gathering outside. Not just neighbors, reporters, cameras, people she'd never seen before. A news van from the local station sat in the parking lot. Margaret called them, Ron said, meeting her at the door. Told them there was going to be a confrontation with a dangerous veteran. Emily's jaw tightened. Of course she did. Inside, the main room was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. Margaret sat in the front row with Paul and Linda, looking calm and composed. When she saw Emily, she smiled. Vickers appeared at Emily's elbow. I've seen ambushes before. This is an ambush. I know. You ready? Emily looked at the crowd, the cameras, Margaret's satisfied expression. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Ron called the meeting to order. The room went quiet, all eyes turning to the front. We're here to talk about recent events in our neighborhood, he began. There's been a lot of rumors, a lot of accusations, and I think it's time we heard the truth directly. From who? Margaret called out. From someone who lied about her past? Ron ignored her. Emily Carter has agreed to speak. I'm asking everyone to listen with an open mind. Emily stood and walked to the front. The cameras followed her. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, judging, measuring, waiting for her to stumble. She didn't stumble. My name is Emily Carter, she began, her voice steady. 6 weeks ago, I moved to this neighborhood looking for a fresh start. I'm a nurse at Riverside General. I work the ER, mostly night shifts. Before that, I served 8 years in the Army as a combat medic. She paused, letting that sink in. 6 years ago, I was investigated for performing medical procedures outside my scope of practice. That investigation was thorough, and I was fully cleared. The reason I performed those procedures was because soldiers were dying, and I was the only one there who could save them. I saved 11 lives. The Army investigated, reviewed all the evidence, and concluded I acted appropriately under the circumstances. She pulled out Vickers' documents and held them up. I have the full investigation file, the clearance letter, and witness statements from the soldiers I saved. Anyone who wants to see them is welcome to. Margaret stood. That's not the point. Let her finish, someone called from the back. Margaret sat down, her face flushed. Emily continued. Since I moved here, I've been harassed, filed against, and had the police called on me for having a barbecue. Tonight, someone leaked a 6-year-old article about an investigation I was cleared of, gave it to reporters, and tried to turn my military service into evidence that I'm dangerous. She looked directly at Margaret. That someone was Margaret Doyle. The room erupted. People shouting, cameras clicking, Margaret on her feet again. That's a lie, Margaret shouted. I was concerned for my safety. You called the Tribune yesterday, Emily cut in. You sent them the article. The reporter confirmed it. Margaret's face went white, then red. Because people have a right to know. Know what? Emily's voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. That I saved lives? That I was investigated and cleared? Or were you hoping they'd just see the headline and assume the worst? You don't belong here, Margaret said, and her voice cracked. You came here pretending to be normal, but you're not. You're military? Emily finished. Yeah, I am. I served my country. I saved lives. And when I came home, I wanted to be a regular person in a regular neighborhood. But you couldn't allow that, could you? Because if I'm just a regular person, you lose your power over me. The room had gone completely silent. I've spent the last 6 weeks being treated like a problem that needs to be solved, Emily continued. I've been polite. I've been accommodating. I've followed every rule, met every standard, and it hasn't mattered. Because this was never about rules or standards. It was about control. She turned to address the whole room. I'm not asking anyone to take my side. I'm asking you to look at the facts. I have documentation, witnesses, and a record that speaks for itself. Margaret has rumors, innuendo, and a pattern of running people out of this neighborhood when they don't fit her idea of who belongs. Margaret was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. You think you're better than everyone? I think I deserve the same respect you'd give anyone else, Emily said quietly. That's all I've ever wanted. Captain Vickers stood from where she'd been sitting in the back. If I may, she said, her voice carrying, I'm Captain Sarah Vickers, U.S. Army, retired. I was Lieutenant Carter's commanding officer for 3 years. I supervised the investigation that's been discussed tonight, and I can confirm everything she said. She was cleared of all charges. The soldiers she saved testified on her behalf, and the Army recognized her actions with multiple commendations. She walked forward, standing next to Emily. What I'm seeing here tonight is a veteran being attacked for her service. That's unacceptable. Emily Carter is one of the most dedicated, capable people I've ever served with. This community is lucky to have her. The weight of Vickers' presence, her authority, her absolute certainty shifted something in the room. People who'd been skeptical looked uncertain. People who'd been on the fence seemed to be tipping in Emily's direction. Then one of the reporters spoke up. Ms. Doyle, did you contact the Tribune with this story? Margaret looked cornered. I was concerned, yes or no? Yes, Margaret said finally, but only because... And have you filed multiple complaints against Ms. Carter since she moved in? She violated, yes or no? Margaret's mouth opened and closed. Around her, Paul and Linda were sinking into their seats, trying to disappear. Yes, she whispered. The reporter turned to Emily. Ms. Carter, are you planning to take legal action? Emily hadn't been. But Janet's sister had told her that morning she had grounds for a harassment lawsuit, possibly defamation depending on what the Tribune had printed. And looking at Margaret's face now, the fear, the realization that this had backfired, Emily made a decision. I'm considering it, she said. The room erupted again. More questions, more shouting. Ron tried to restore order, but it was chaos. In the middle of it, Margaret stood and walked out, Paul and Linda trailing behind her. Cameras followed them. Emily watched her go and felt nothing. Not victory, not satisfaction, just exhaustion. The meeting broke up shortly after. People approached Emily, some to apologize, some to offer support, some just curious. Vickers ran interference, politely but firmly moving people along. By 8:30, only Emily, Vickers, Ron, and Amy remained. That went better than expected, Ron said. Did it? Emily asked. You're still standing. Margaret's reputation is shot. I'd call that a win. Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Margaret had left too easily. Someone that calculated, that determined, didn't just walk away. Vickers seemed to sense it too. Watch your back, she said quietly. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Emily went home alone, Vickers heading to a hotel, and Ron promising to keep monitoring the neighborhood chat. The house was dark and quiet. Emily locked the door, checked the windows, and sat down with her phone. The Tribune had posted a follow-up article. Veteran confronts accuser in heated community meeting. It was more balanced than the first piece, included quotes from Vickers, mentioned the clearance. But the comments section was a war zone, people arguing, calling each other names, dragging Emily's entire service record through the mud. She stopped reading and checked her work email. A message from the hospital administrator. Emily, I need to speak with you about recent media attention. Please call me tomorrow. Her stomach dropped. She'd known this was coming. The hospital couldn't have an employee at the center of a public controversy, especially not one involving accusations of misconduct, even cleared ones. She was about to lose her job. Emily set the phone down and stared at her hands. They were steady. They'd been steady through firefights, through trauma surgeries, through investigations and hearings, and the slow disintegration of her military career. They'd stay steady now. She had to. At 11 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Emily Carter? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. Yes. This is Officer Brennan's dispatcher. We have a situation at 52 Ridgewood Grove. Margaret Doyle called 911. She's claiming you threatened her tonight after the meeting. Emily's blood went cold. That's not true. I haven't been near her house. I understand, ma'am, but we need to send units to investigate. I'm calling as a courtesy. Officer Brennan thought you should know. Thank you. Emily hung up and immediately called Ron. Margaret's claiming I threatened her. What? When? Tonight, allegedly. After the meeting. That's insane. You were with us the whole time. I know, but she's filing a report anyway. Ron swore. She's trying to get you arrested. If you have charges filed, the hospital will definitely fire you. Emily knew. She'd known the moment the dispatcher said Margaret's name. This was the move. Margaret couldn't beat her in public, so she was changing tactics. A police report, even if unfounded, would be enough to damage Emily's reputation beyond repair. I need witnesses, Emily said. Everyone who saw me leave the meeting, timestamps, everything. I'm on it. Emily spent the next hour documenting her movements. She'd left the community center at 8:22, stopped for gas at 8:35, and been home by 8:45. Her receipt from the gas station had a timestamp. The station had cameras. She could prove she'd never gone near Margaret's house, but that didn't mean the arrest wouldn't happen. At 1 a.m., patrol cars pulled up outside. Emily watched through her window as two officers, not Brennan, different ones, approached her door. She opened it before they could knock. Emily Carter? The lead officer asked. Yes. We need you to come with us. There's been a complaint filed. I understand. Can I see the complaint? The officer hesitated, then handed her a copy. Emily read it quickly. Margaret claimed Emily had appeared outside her house at 9:15 p.m., banged on the door, and shouted threats. Paul and Linda were listed as witnesses. I wasn't there, Emily said calmly. I have proof. You can present that at the station. Am I under arrest? Not yet. We're asking you to come voluntarily. Emily knew what that meant. If she refused, they'd arrest her. If she went voluntarily, it looked like cooperation. Either way, by morning, the headlines would read, Controversial Veteran Detained in Harassment Case. Margaret had won. Let me get my keys, Emily said. She was about to step back inside when headlights flooded the street. A vehicle pulled up fast. Vickers' pickup truck. The captain stepped out, followed by someone Emily didn't recognize at first. Then she saw the uniform. Colonel Marcus Webb, base commander from Fort Bragg. The officer straightened instinctively. Evening, gentlemen, Webb said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people obey without question. I'm Colonel Webb. This is Captain Vickers. We're here regarding Emily Carter. The lead officer looked confused. Sir, we have a complaint. I'm aware. I've reviewed the allegations. Webb pulled out his phone and showed them something. I've also reviewed security footage from the community center, gas station camera footage, and GPS data from Ms. Carter's vehicle. At the time Ms. Doyle claims Ms. Carter was at her residence, Ms. Carter was 3 miles away pumping gas. The officers exchanged glances. Furthermore, Webb continued, I've spoken with the witnesses Ms. Doyle listed. They've recanted their statements. Apparently, they were pressured to corroborate a false claim. Emily stared at Webb, then at Vickers. How? Made some calls, Vickers said quietly. Called in some favors. The colonel owed me. Webb looked at the officers. I strongly suggest you return to Ms. Doyle and inform her that filing a false police report is a criminal offense. If she persists, there will be consequences. The lead officer nodded slowly. Yes, sir. We'll handle it. They left. The patrol cars pulled away. Emily stood in her driveway, shaking slightly as the adrenaline finally hit. Webb extended his hand. Ms. Carter, I've heard a lot about you. Emily shook it. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Thank the captain. She's very persuasive. He glanced at Vickers. I'll file my report in the morning. This should shut down any further attempts. After he left, Emily turned to Vickers. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. You saved my husband. I save you. That's how this works. Vickers put a hand on Emily's shoulder. It's over, Carter. She's done. But even as Vickers said it, Emily's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You think you've won. Check your hospital email. Emily's hands went cold as she opened her work email on her phone. A new message from administration sent 20 minutes ago. Emily, in light of recent events and pending internal review, you are suspended effective immediately pending investigation into conduct violations. Do not report for your scheduled shifts. HR will contact you. Margaret hadn't won the public battle, but she'd already made the call that would cost Emily everything else. Emily stared at the email until the words blurred. Suspended. Pending investigation. The carefully neutral language didn't hide what it really meant. Someone at the hospital had been contacted, fed a version of events, and made a decision before Emily even knew she was being accused. Vickers was reading over her shoulder. When did that go out? 20 minutes ago, while we were dealing with the police. She planned this. Vickers' voice was flat, analytical. Multiple angles of attack. If the police thing didn't work, the job thing would. Emily's phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. Told you. You should have left when you had the chance. She showed it to Vickers, who pulled out her own phone and started making calls. Emily stood there in her driveway, the night air cold on her skin, and felt something shift inside her. Not panic, not even anger, just a cold, clear certainty. Margaret wanted a war. She was going to get one. I need to see Janet's sister, Emily said. Tonight. Vickers finished her call and nodded. I'll drive. They met at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The kind of place where the coffee was terrible and nobody asked questions. Janet's sister, Rebecca, was already there, laptop open, legal pad covered in notes. She was maybe 40, with sharp eyes, and the kind of presence that suggested she won more cases than she lost. Tell me everything, Rebecca said as Emily slid into the booth. Emily did. The entire timeline, every interaction, every document. Rebecca took notes, asked pointed questions, and by the time Emily finished, the lawyer's expression had gone from interested to predatory. This is textbook harassment, Rebecca said. Defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, possibly tortious interference with employment. And the false police report tonight? That's criminal. Can we prove it? Emily asked. The police report recantations help. The timing of the hospital suspension is suspicious enough to warrant discovery. And if we can show a pattern, Rebecca flipped through her notes. You said there was a family 2 years ago, the ones she ran out? Iranian couple. Ron mentioned them. Find them. If they'll testify about similar treatment that establishes a pattern of discriminatory behavior. Rebecca looked up. How far do you want to take this? Emily met her eyes. All the way. That means going public, filing suit, probably getting more media attention. It'll get uglier before it gets better. It's already ugly, Vickers said from beside Emily. Might as well make it count. Rebecca nodded slowly. Okay, I'll start drafting the complaint, but there's something else you need to do first. What? Talk to your hospital administrator, in person, before Margaret or whoever she's working with can spin this further. Rebecca pulled out a business card. Take this. My card. If they try to meet without representation, you call me immediately. Emily took the card. They suspended me. They're not going to want to talk. They will when you threaten to sue them too, Rebecca said. Hospital HR departments hate lawsuits, even more than they hate controversy. By the time Emily got home, it was 3 a.m. She didn't sleep, just sat at her kitchen table with coffee she didn't drink and stared at the documents Vickers had left. Her service record, the investigation file, the clearance letter. Proof of who she'd been, who she still was, underneath the civilian clothes and the ER shifts and the desperate need to be normal. At 7 a.m., she called Riverside General and asked for the administrator's office. The secretary tried to put her off, but Emily was polite and persistent, and eventually the administrator, a man named Gerald Holloway, who Emily had met exactly once, agreed to see her at 10. She dressed carefully. Slacks, blouse, the same outfit she'd worn to the HOA hearing. Professional, calm, not someone who could be easily dismissed. She arrived 15 minutes early and waited in the lobby, watching nurses and doctors filter past, some of them people she'd worked with. A few nodded. Most looked away. Holloway's office was on the 4th floor, all glass and polished wood. He stood when she entered, offered his hand, gestured to a chair. His smile was practiced, administrative. "Ms. Carter, thank you for coming in." "I want to know why I was suspended," Emily said, skipping the pleasantries. Holloway's smile tightened. "I'm sure you understand, given the recent media attention and allegations of misconduct, allegations that were investigated and dismissed 6 years ago." "Yes, well, the hospital has to consider its reputation. When employees become the subject of public controversy—" "Who called you?" Emily asked quietly. Holloway blinked. "I'm sorry? Someone contacted you, told you about the investigation, probably gave you their version of events. Who was it?" "I'm not at liberty to say." "Was it Margaret Doyle?" The slight widening of his eyes was answer enough. Emily leaned forward. "Mr. Holloway, I've worked here for 6 weeks. In that time, I've had perfect attendance, 0 complaints, and a track record of saving lives. The only controversy I've been involved in is a neighbor who's been systematically harassing me since I moved in. She leaked a years-old story to the press, filed false police reports, and now she's apparently calling my employer to get me fired. The hospital has to protect itself." "From what? From a nurse who served her country and was cleared of all charges?" Emily pulled out Rebecca's card and set it on his desk. "My attorney is prepared to file suit against Margaret Doyle for harassment, defamation, and interference with employment. If this hospital participates in that interference by suspending me based on false allegations, we'll include you in that suit." Holloway's face went pale. "You can't." "I can, and I will." Emily stood. "I want my suspension reversed by end of business today. I want a written apology, and I want it noted in my file that these allegations were investigated and dismissed years ago by the United States Army. I'll need to consult with legal—" "You do that. My attorney will be waiting for your call." Emily turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Holloway, I'm a good nurse. I save lives. That's all I've ever wanted to do. If you let Margaret Doyle take that away from me, you're going to regret it." She left before he could respond. The call came 3 hours later. The suspension was being reviewed. The hospital's legal department wanted to meet. Emily forwarded everything to Rebecca and let the lawyer handle it. She had other things to do. Finding the Iranian family took most of the afternoon. Ron had a name, Reza and Nasran Ahmadi, and an old address, but they'd moved after leaving Ridgewood Grove. Emily tracked them through public records, social media, finally found a phone number for a Reza Ahmadi in Richmond. The man who answered was cautious at first, wary of a stranger calling out of nowhere. But when Emily explained who she was and why she was calling, his tone changed. "Margaret Doyle," he said, and there was weight in those 2 words. "Yes, I remember her very well. I'd like to talk to you about what happened, if you're willing." There was a long pause. "My wife doesn't like to think about that time. It was very difficult. I understand, but she's doing it again, to me, and I'm trying to stop her." Another pause. Then, "Come to Richmond, tomorrow, if you can. We'll talk." Emily drove down the next morning with Vickers riding shotgun. The Ahmadis lived in a small house near VCU, neat and well-kept, with a garden that looked like someone spent serious time on it. Nazrin answered the door, a small woman with kind eyes and gray in her dark hair. She looked at Emily for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. I made tea." They sat in the living room, and Emily listened as Reza and Nasreen told their story. It was eerily familiar, the small complaints that escalated, the rumors that spread, the gradual isolation as neighbors stopped talking to them. But there were darker elements, too. Vandalism, hateful letters, someone slashing their tires. And through it all, Margaret at the center, always with plausible deniability, always just concerned about the neighborhood. "We reported it to the police," Reza said, "multiple times, but nothing ever came of it. No proof," they said. "No witnesses." "Did Margaret ever contact your employer?" Emily asked. Nazrin nodded. "Reza was a professor at the university. Someone called the dean's office, said he was making students uncomfortable, saying inappropriate things about politics. It was investigated. He was cleared. But the damage was done. We left because we were tired," Reza said quietly. "Tired of fighting, tired of looking over our shoulders. We had a daughter starting high school. We didn't want her growing up in that environment." "I'm sorry," Emily said, and meant it. "Don't be sorry," Nazrin said. "Stop her. Don't let her do this to anyone else." Emily looked at Vickers, who nodded, then back at the Ahmadis. "Would you be willing to testify? In a lawsuit?" Reza and Nasrin looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Then Reza nodded. "Yes, we'll testify." Rebecca filed the lawsuit 3 days later. The complaint was 37 pages and didn't pull punches. It named Margaret Doyle as the primary defendant, detailed every instance of harassment, included witness statements from Ron, Amy, Derek, and the Ahmadis, and demanded damages for emotional distress, defamation, and interference with employment. It also named Paul and Linda as co-defendants for their role in the false police report. The news broke on a Friday afternoon. By Friday evening, it was the lead story on every local station. Emily's phone exploded with calls, reporters, neighbors, people she'd never met weighing in with opinions. She ignored most of them. But when Officer Brennan called, she answered. "Wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "The department's opening a formal investigation into the false report. Margaret's being asked to come in for questioning." "Will she face charges?" "Depends on what she says. But yeah, probably." He paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened to you. You were just doing your job. Still, nobody should have to go through this." The hospital reversed Emily's suspension on Monday. No apology, just a terse email stating that after reviewing all available information, they found no grounds for disciplinary action. Emily's attorney pushed for more, but Emily told her to let it go. She had her job back. That was enough. Her first shift back was Tuesday night. She walked into the ER expecting awkwardness, maybe hostility. Instead, Janet met her at the door with coffee and a fierce hug. "About time you came back? We've been drowning without you." The other nurses were similarly welcoming. A few asked questions, gentle, careful questions about what had happened. Emily gave short answers, focused on work. By midnight, it felt almost normal. A stabbing victim, 2 heart attacks, a kid who'd swallowed a penny. The usual chaos that made everything else fade into background noise. Around 3 a.m., during a rare quiet moment, Janet sat down next to her. "Margaret's house is for sale." Emily looked up. "What?" "Saw the sign go up yesterday. Ron said she's moving. Fast. Like within the month fast." Emily processed this. "She's running." Can you blame her? The lawsuit, the police investigation, the whole neighborhood turning on her. Janet shook her head. Couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. Emily wanted to feel satisfaction, vindication, but all she felt was tired. "I just wanted to live there, that's all. Just exist without drama." "You will. Once she's gone." But Margaret wasn't gone yet, and she had one more move to make. The email arrived Thursday morning, sent to the entire neighborhood mailing list. Emily saw it when she woke up after her shift, her phone already buzzing with texts from Ron and Amy. The subject line read, "The truth about Emily Carter." The email was long, rambling, desperate. Margaret claimed she was being persecuted for trying to maintain community standards, that Emily had used her military connections to intimidate and threaten, that the lawsuit was frivolous, filed by a vindictive woman who couldn't handle being held accountable. She included links to articles about the investigation, screenshots of emails taken out of context, Even a photo of Emily in uniform with a caption suggesting she was mentally unstable. It was a massacre, a final scorched earth attempt to destroy Emily's reputation before she left. Emily read it twice, then forwarded it to Rebecca with a single line. "Is this actionable?" Rebecca's response was immediate. "Oh yes, screenshot everything. This is evidence." The neighborhood's response was swift and brutal. Ron sent a counter email with the full timeline of events, including the Ahmadi's testimony and the police investigation findings. Amy organized a group response signed by 37 neighbors condemning Margaret's behavior. Even people who'd stayed neutral through the whole ordeal spoke up, saying the email crossed a line. By that afternoon, Margaret had deleted the email and issued a terse apology, but the damage to her reputation was complete. People who'd been her friends for years stopped speaking to her. The HOA board quietly asked for her resignation. Her house went under contract within a week, sold to a young couple with a baby who had no idea about the drama they were inheriting. Margaret moved out on a Saturday. Emily watched from her window as the moving truck pulled away. Margaret sitting in her car until the last box was loaded. For a moment, Emily thought about going over, saying something. She wasn't sure what. But Vickers' voice in her head reminded her, "You won. Let her go." So she did. The lawsuit settled 2 weeks later. Margaret's insurance company wanted to avoid trial, and Rebecca negotiated a settlement that included a cash payment, a written apology, and an agreement that Margaret would have no contact with Emily or anyone in Ridgewood Grove. Paul and Linda issued separate apologies and paid small settlements of their own. Emily took the money and put it toward the Iranian family's legal fund. They were suing Margaret separately for what had happened to them. Then she went back to work, back to her life, and tried to figure out what normal actually looked like. It took time. Neighbors who'd been distant started waving again. Ron organized another barbecue, and this time more people came, genuinely friendly, genuinely curious about who Emily actually was beneath the headlines. Amy brought Caleb over to swim in Emily's little inflatable pool. Derek helped fix her fence. Small things. Normal things. One evening in late June, Emily was sitting in her backyard watching the string lights sway in the breeze when her phone rang. Captain Vickers. "You sitting down?" Vickers asked. "Should I be?" "Margaret Doyle was just arrested." Emily sat up. "For what?" "Wire fraud, identity theft, and harassment. Turns out she wasn't just targeting you and the Ahmadis. There were 3 other families over the past decade. She had a whole system, filing false complaints, contacting employers, even creating fake social media accounts to spread rumors." Vickers paused. "One of her victims was an FBI agent. He'd been quietly building a case for 2 years. Your lawsuit gave him the final piece he needed." Emily couldn't speak for a moment. "How long?" "Federal charges? If she's convicted, she's looking at serious time. 5 to 10, maybe more depending on the counts." After they hung up, Emily sat in the dark and tried to process it. Margaret was facing prison. Real consequences. The kind that couldn't be bought off or talked away. Part of her felt vindicated. Part of her just felt sad. Sad that it had taken this long. Sad that so many people had been hurt before anyone stopped her. Sad that Margaret had destroyed her own life chasing something as pointless as control. The next morning, Ron knocked on her door with coffee and bagels. "You heard?" "Yeah. How you feeling?" Emily thought about it. "Tired, but okay." They sat on her front porch, drinking coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. A jogger passed. Someone walked their dog. Normal Saturday morning sounds. "You planning to stay?" Ron asked. "Yeah," Emily said. "I think I am." "Good. We need you here." He paused. "You know, for what it's worth, I think Margaret was right about one thing." Emily looked at him. "You're not just another neighbor," Ron said. "You're better than that. And this neighborhood's better because you're here." Emily felt something warm settle in her chest. Not happiness, exactly. More like peace. "Thanks, Ron." A week later, Emily was working a night shift when an ambulance brought in a multi-vehicle accident. 3 patients, all critical. She moved into autopilot, calling orders, starting lines, working the chaos the way she'd been trained. The first patient stabilized. The second needed surgery but would make it. The third was a kid, maybe 20, with massive internal bleeding and failing vitals. Emily worked on him for 40 minutes, refusing to quit, even when the attending suggested calling it. She tried everything: transfusions, medications, pressure, prayer to the skills she'd learned in combat zones where quitting meant someone died. And finally, his pressure stabilized. His heart found rhythm. He lived. She walked out into the hallway after, covered in blood, shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Janet was waiting with water and a towel. "Hell of a save," Janet said. Emily nodded, unable to speak. "You okay?" "Yeah." Emily wiped her face. "Yeah, I'm good." And for the first time in a very long time, she meant it. 2 months after Margaret's arrest, Emily got a letter. Official stationery, return address from the Department of Defense. She opened it carefully, half expecting more trouble, more questions, more proof that her past would never let her go. Instead, it was an invitation. The Army was holding a ceremony honoring medics who'd saved lives in combat. Emily's name was on the list. They wanted her to attend, to accept a citation for valor that had been approved years ago but never formally presented. She called Vickers. "Did you know about this?" "I may have made a few calls," Vickers admitted. "You earned that citation, Carter. Time you got it." Emily went to the ceremony, wore her uniform one last time, stood with other medics, other veterans, other people who'd made the same impossible choices under fire. When they called her name and pinned the medal to her chest, she thought about the soldiers she'd saved, the ones she'd lost, the investigation that had nearly destroyed her, and the neighborhood that had almost broken her. She thought about Margaret sitting in a cell somewhere, facing the consequences of a decade of cruelty. And she thought about the kid from last week, alive because she'd refused to quit. The ceremony ended. People shook her hand, thanked her for her service. Emily smiled and nodded and felt the weight of the medal against her chest. Then she drove home to Ridgewood Grove, to the small house with the string lights and the rose bush she'd finally managed to keep alive. Ron was waiting on her porch. "How'd it go?" he asked. Emily showed him the medal. He whistled, impressed. "You know what this means, right?" Ron said. "Neighborhood's got a genuine war hero. Margaret must be rolling in her cell." Emily laughed, actually laughed. "Don't." "Can't help it. It's too perfect." He stood. "Come on. Amy's got dinner at her place. Everyone's coming. They want to celebrate." Emily hesitated. She was tired. She wanted to go inside, close the door, be alone. But Ron was looking at her with such genuine warmth, such uncomplicated friendship, that she found herself nodding. "Okay, give me 10 minutes to change." The dinner was loud and chaotic and full of people who actually seemed happy she existed. They asked about the ceremony, the medal, her service. Emily answered carefully at first, then more openly as she realized they weren't looking for proof or ammunition. They were just curious, interested, human. Late in the evening, after most people had left, Emily stood in Amy's backyard and looked at the houses stretching along the street. Lights in windows, families settling in for the night. Her neighbors. Her community. Her home. She was about to head out when Amy caught her arm. "Hey, before you go, there's something you should know." "What?" "Remember how Margaret's house sold to that young couple?" Amy's expression was strange, nervous, excited, something Emily couldn't quite read. "Yeah? They're moving in next week. I met them yesterday. They seem nice." Amy paused. "The husband's a veteran, Marine. Just got out after 6 years. Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Amy, what are you not telling me?" "He's having a hard time adjusting. His wife mentioned it. PTSD, trouble sleeping, hard time finding work." Amy met Emily's eyes. "I told her you might be able to help, that you'd been through it, that you'd understand." Emily wanted to say no. Wanted to tell Amy that she'd barely figured out her own adjustment, that she didn't have the capacity to help someone else navigate theirs. But she looked at Amy's hopeful face and thought about all the people who'd helped her when she needed it. Vickers, Ron, the Amadis, even Officer Brennan in his own way. "Yeah," Emily said quietly. "Okay, I'll talk to them." Amy smiled, relieved. "Thank you." As Emily drove home that night, she realized something had shifted. She'd come to Ridgewood Grove trying to disappear, to be nobody, to leave Emily Carter, the combat medic, behind and become just Emily, the nurse. But that wasn't possible, wasn't even desirable. She was both. She'd always been both. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that was more than okay. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, looking at her house. The lights were off. The street was quiet. Tomorrow she'd work another shift. Next week she'd meet the new neighbors. In a month the trial would start and she'd have to testify about everything Margaret had done. But tonight, she was just tired. Emily got out of the car and headed for her door. She was halfway there when she noticed the envelope tucked under her mat. No postage, no return address, hand-delivered. Her stomach dropped. She picked it up carefully, turned it over. Her name written in neat block letters across the front. She opened it with shaking hands and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't from Margaret, it was a photocopy of a military document. Orders. Dated 3 weeks ago. Classified. Eyes only. And at the bottom, highlighted in yellow. Lieutenant Emily Carter. Recall to active duty. Effective immediately. Report Fort Bragg. Medical emergency deployment. Authorization level. Critical. Emily read it 3 times, her heart pounding. This wasn't possible. She'd been discharged. She was a civilian now. They couldn't just... Her phone rang. Captain Vickers. Emily answered, her voice barely steady. Tell me this is fake. I wish I could, Vickers said, and there was something in her tone Emily had never heard before. Fear. Emily, there's been an incident. Overseas, massive casualties. They're recalling every combat medic they can find. The ones with your experience. She stopped. They need you. The Army needs you. Emily looked at her house, her quiet street, her normal life. When? She asked. 48 hours. I'm sorry, Carter. I tried to stop it. But this is above my pay grade. Emily hung up and stood in her driveway holding the orders and felt her carefully rebuilt world crack apart. She had 48 hours, and Margaret Doyle, sitting in her cell, would never know that she'd won after all. Emily stood in her driveway, the recall orders crumpling slightly in her grip, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. 48 hours. 2 days to pack up the life she'd barely started building, to say goodbye to the neighborhood she'd fought so hard to stay in, to become Lieutenant Carter again when she'd finally figured out how to just be Emily. She went inside, sat on her couch in the dark, and let herself have 5 minutes. 5 minutes to feel the unfairness of it, the cruel timing, the fact that she'd won every battle with Margaret only to lose the war to circumstances beyond anyone's control. 5 minutes to be angry at the Army, at the universe, at herself for thinking she could ever really escape. Then she stood up and started packing. At 6 a.m., Ron knocked on her door. She'd texted him an hour earlier, short, factual, just the basics. He stood on her porch with 2 coffees and the kind of expression that said he already knew this conversation was going to hurt. How long? He asked. Don't know. 6 months, maybe a year. Depends on the situation. Ron handed her a coffee. The new neighbors move in next week, the Marine and his wife. I know. I was going to ask you to help him adjust. Show him around, maybe talk about... Ron stopped. Doesn't matter now. Emily took a drink of coffee she couldn't taste. Yeah, it does. She pulled out her phone, opened a note she'd started writing at 4 a.m. This is everything I wish someone had told me when I got out. Resources, contacts, things to watch for. Give it to him. Tell him... Her voice caught. Tell him it gets easier, eventually. Ron took the phone, read the note, and when he looked back up, his eyes were wet. You're coming back, right? I don't know. Emily... I really don't know, Ron. I don't know what I'm walking into. I don't know if I'll be the same person when it's over. I barely know who I am now. She set down the coffee. But I know you'll take care of things here. You and Amy and everyone else. You'll make sure that Maureen doesn't go through what I went through. That's not the same as you being here. No, Emily agreed. It's not. News traveled fast in Ridgewood Grove. By noon, people were stopping by. Some to say goodbye, some just to stand awkwardly in her doorway and not know what to say. Amy came with Caleb, who gave Emily a drawing of a soldier with a heart on their uniform. Derek brought groceries she wouldn't have time to eat. Janet showed up after her shift with a care package full of things Emily would actually need. Good socks, travel-sized toiletries, protein bars that didn't taste like cardboard. I pulled some strings, Janet said. Got you assigned to the best trauma unit they've got. My cousin's a colonel at Walter Reed. He made calls. Emily hugged her, hard. Thank you. Bring yourself back in one piece. We need good nurses. The lawyer, Rebecca, called that afternoon. The trial's in 3 weeks. Margaret's going to walk if you're not there to testify. Emily closed her eyes. I know. Can you get leave? Even just for a day? I'll try. But Rebecca, if I can't, the Ahmadi's testimony should be enough. You've got the documentation. You don't need me. The jury needs to see you, needs to hear what she did to a decorated veteran. Rebecca's voice softened. But I understand. Just try. That evening, Emily sat in her backyard one last time, watching the string lights sway. Vickers had texted earlier, brief, efficient, just coordinates and a time to report. No apology. They both knew this wasn't something you apologized for. This was the cost of being good at something the world still needed. She was still sitting there when a car pulled up out front. Unfamiliar vehicle. Emily tensed, old instincts kicking in, until she saw who got out. The Ahmadis. Reza and Nasrin, looking older and more tired than they had in Richmond. Emily met them at her door. What are you doing here? We heard, Nasrin said simply. We came to say thank you. For what? For finishing what we couldn't. Reza gestured to the neighborhood, the quiet street, the houses where people lived without fear now. Margaret's gone. She's facing justice. Because you didn't run. I'm running now, Emily said quietly. No? Nasrin took her hand. You're serving. There's a difference. They stayed for an hour drinking tea Emily barely tasted, talking about everything and nothing. When they left, Nasrin pressed something into Emily's palm, a small blue stone, smooth and worn. For protection, she said, and to remember you're not alone. Emily closed her fingers around it and nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The next morning, Emily drove to Riverside General to handle her resignation. Holloway looked uncomfortable when she walked into his office, like he couldn't quite meet her eyes. The Army's requesting medical personnel, Emily said, handing him the paperwork. I'm being recalled, effective immediately. Holloway scanned the documents. How long? Unknown. Will you be coming back? Emily thought about it. This job, this hospital, the ER where she'd spent 6 weeks proving she could do normal. I don't know. Can you hold my position? For 6 months? After that? I understand. Holloway set down the papers and finally looked at her. For what it's worth, Ms. Carter, you're one of the best nurses we've had. I'm sorry about the suspension. I should have... He stopped. I should have trusted you. Emily nodded. Yeah, you should have. She cleaned out her locker, said goodbye to the staff, and walked out of the hospital for what might be the last time. In her car, she sat for a moment and let herself grieve the loss of it, the routine, the normalcy, the version of herself who just saved lives without carrying a rifle. Then she drove home and finished packing. That night, the neighborhood threw her a send-off. Nothing formal, just people gathering in Ron's backyard with food and beer and the kind of awkward affection that comes from not knowing how to say goodbye to someone you barely got to know. Emily moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and handshakes and promises to write, and felt like she was watching it happen to someone else. The young couple who'd bought Margaret's house showed up, Jason and Mia, the Marine and his wife. Jason had that look Emily recognized immediately, the 1,000-yard stare that said he'd seen things he couldn't unsee. Mia held his hand tight, protective. Heard you're deploying, Jason said. Yeah. Where? Can't say yet. He nodded, understanding. Ron told us about you, what you did here, standing up to that woman. I didn't do it alone. Still. Jason met her eyes, and there was respect there, the kind you can't fake. Thank you for making this place safe enough that I felt like I could come here. Emily felt something crack in her chest. Take care of each other, and if it gets hard, when it gets hard, let people help. Don't try to do it alone. Mia squeezed her husband's hand. Will you come back? I hope so. Later, after most people had left, Emily found herself alone with Ron and Amy. They sat on Ron's porch, watching the stars, not saying much because there wasn't much left to say. You know what the worst part is? Emily said finally. I was just starting to believe I could have this. A normal life. A home. You can, Amy said, when you come back. If I come back, Ron turned to look at her. You will, because you're too stubborn not to, and because we'll be here waiting. Emily wanted to believe him, Wanted to think that somewhere in the future she'd walk back into this neighborhood and pick up where she left off. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. She left at dawn. No big goodbye, no final speech, just loaded her bags into her car, locked her house, and drove away while the neighborhood still slept. In her rearview mirror, Ridgewood Grove got smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely, like maybe it had never been real at all. Fort Bragg was exactly as she remembered, sprawling, efficient, full of people moving with purpose. Emily checked in, received her assignment, and found herself standing in front of a barracks she'd lived in 7 years ago. Different bed, same walls, same fluorescent lights that never quite let you forget where you were. Captain Vickers found her that afternoon. "You okay?" "No, but I will be." "The deployment's confirmed. You ship out in 4 days. It's bad over there, Carter. Worse than anything we dealt with." "I know." "You don't have to do this. I can find a way to get you reassigned stateside. Medical training, something administrative." "Sarah?" Emily cut her off. "I'm a combat medic. That's what I do. That's what I'm good at." Vickers looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah, you are." The next 3 days were a blur of briefings, equipment checks, medical refreshers. Emily fell back into it easier than she wanted to admit. The language, the routine, the version of herself that existed in uniform. Lieutenant Carter, who knew exactly what she was doing and never questioned orders. It fit like an old coat, comfortable and constricting at the same time. On her last night stateside, Emily's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Emily Carter?" A woman's voice. Unfamiliar? "Yes." "This is Sarah Kim from the Washington Post. I'm writing a story about Margaret Doyle's trial. I understand you were subpoenaed to testify, but you're being deployed. I can't talk about an ongoing case. I'm not asking about the case. I'm asking about you. About what it's like to be a veteran targeted by someone like Margaret Doyle. About how the system failed you." Emily almost hung up, but then she thought about the Amatis, about the 3 other families Margaret had destroyed, about Jason and Mia and every other veteran who'd come home trying to build normal lives only to face battles they weren't trained for. "Okay," she said, "I'll talk, but not about me. About what needs to change." The interview lasted an hour. Emily talked about the gap between military service and civilian life, about communities that say they support veterans but don't know how, about people like Margaret who exploit that vulnerability. She talked about what had worked, neighbors who stood up, lawyers who fought back, officers who remembered their training, and she talked about what needed to be better. When it was over, the reporter was quiet for a moment. "Thank you. This is going to help a lot of people." "I hope so," Emily said. The article ran the day before Emily deployed. She didn't see it until she was on the transport plane, cramped between other soldiers, reading it on her phone while they flew toward whatever hell awaited them. The headline read, "When Heroes Come Home, One Veteran's Fight for Belonging." It was fair, honest. Didn't make her a saint or a victim, just a person who'd fought for something simple and been forced to fight harder than she should have. The comments section was predictably mixed, some supportive, some calling her weak for not just moving, some blaming her for everything. Emily read it all, then turned off her phone and tried to sleep. The deployment was as bad as Vickers had warned. Worse, maybe. Emily spent 6 months in a field hospital where the casualties never stopped coming, where she worked 18-hour shifts and forgot what silence sounded like. She saved lives, lost some, did things she'd have to live with later, made calls she'd question forever, became the person she'd been trying to leave behind. But she also found something she'd lost. Purpose. The absolute certainty that what she was doing mattered, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, using skills that took years to build and couldn't be replaced. It didn't make it easier, but it made it bearable. Letters from Ridgewood Grove arrived sporadically. Ron writing about the new neighbors, how Jason was doing better, how Mia had started a support group for military spouses. Amy sending photos of Caleb, who asked about Emily constantly. Janet with updates about the hospital, the ER, the shifts that weren't the same without her. And one from Rebecca. Trial concluded. Margaret Doyle convicted on all counts, sentencing in 3 weeks. Your testimony wasn't needed, the Amatis were incredible, but the judge read your Washington Post interview into the record, said it showed the real impact of her actions. She's looking at 8 to 12 years. Emily read that letter 3 times, sitting in her tent after a shift where she'd lost a 20-year-old kid to injuries she couldn't fix. 8 to 12 years. Justice. The word felt hollow after everything, but it was something. She wrote back, "Thank you for everything. Make sure the Ahmadis know how much their courage mattered." At month 7, Emily's unit got pulled back for rotation. She flew home exhausted and changed in ways she was still cataloging and found Vickers waiting at the airport. "You look like hell," Vickers said. "Feel like it too." They drove in silence for a while. Then Vickers said, "Your recall orders were rescinded. You fulfilled your obligation. You can go back to civilian life if you want." "If I want," Emily repeated. "Or you can stay. Take a teaching position. Train the next generation of combat medics. Use what you learned over there to save lives over here." Vickers glanced at her. "Your choice." Emily stared out the window at the Virginia landscape rolling past. "Can I have some time to think about it?" "Take all the time you need and—" Vickers dropped her at Ridgewood Grove at dusk. Emily sat in her car for a long moment, looking at her house. Someone had maintained it, the lawn was mowed, the rose bush was alive, even the string lights were still up. A note on the door in Ron's handwriting. "Welcome home. We kept it ready." Emily unlocked the door and stepped into a house that smelled like cleaning supplies and fresh flowers. A vase on the kitchen table, full of daisies. The fridge stocked with basics. Her mail sorted into neat stacks. Evidence of care, of community, of people who'd kept their promise. She sat on her couch and cried for the first time in 7 months. The knock came an hour later. Ron, Amy, Derek, Janet, the Ahmadis, even Jason and Mia. They filled her living room bringing food and noise and life, and Emily let herself be swept up in it. They didn't ask about the deployment, didn't push for details, just welcomed her back like she'd never left. "Margaret was sentenced last week," Ron said over dinner. 10 years, federal prison. Emily nodded, processing it. A decade. Margaret would be 72 when she got out. If she got out. For some people, prison time didn't end at release. The stigma, the record, the closed doors that never reopened. Margaret's life as she knew it was over. "How do you feel about it?" Amy asked quietly. Emily thought about the question. "Glad it's done. Sad it had to happen. Angry it took so long." She looked around the room. "Grateful it's over." Later, after everyone left, Emily stood in her backyard under the string lights and thought about what came next. The Army wanted her to teach. The hospital wanted her back. Ridgewood Grove wanted her to stay. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Emily wanted something too. She wanted to build something that lasted. Not just for herself, but for people like Jason, like the Ahmadis, like every veteran who came home and found that home didn't feel like home anymore. She wanted to create a space where people could land softly, where neighbors actually meant it when they said welcome, where someone like Margaret couldn't destroy lives just because she was scared of change. The next morning, Emily called Vickers. "I'll take the teaching position, but I want to do it part-time. The rest of the time, I want to work on something else." "What?" "A transition program for veterans coming into civilian communities. Help them navigate the systems, connect with resources, avoid the mistakes I made." Emily paused. "And help communities understand what they're getting when a veteran moves in. Education goes both ways." Vickers was quiet for a moment. "That's ambitious." "Yeah, it is. You'll need funding, support, buy-in from both military and civilian leadership." "I know. Can you help?" "Carter, I'd be insulted if you didn't ask." Vickers laughed. "Send me a proposal. I'll make some calls." Emily spent the next month building it. The program, the structure, the partnerships. Ron helped connect her with local government. Rebecca provided legal framework. Janet's sister, who'd been so helpful before, offered pro bono consulting. The Ahmadis agreed to serve on an advisory board. Jason and Mia volunteered to be pilot participants. It started small, just a handful of veterans, a few interested communities. But word spread. Other neighborhoods reached out. More veterans signed up. The program grew, evolved, became something bigger than Emily had imagined. 6 months after she came back, Emily was invited to speak at a veterans conference in D.C. She stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, and told her story. Not the sanitized version, not the hero narrative, just the truth. She talked about Margaret, about the harassment, about fighting for the simple right to exist in peace. She talked about the neighbors who'd stood up, the community that had changed, the difference between being tolerated and being welcomed. And she talked about what came after. I spent years trying to stop being a soldier, Emily said, trying to become just another civilian, just another nurse, just another neighbor. But that's not how it works. We're not just one thing. We're all of it. The person we were in uniform, the person we became because of it, and the person we're still becoming. The question isn't whether we belong. It's whether communities are ready to make space for all of who we are. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, people lined up to talk to her. Veterans with their own Margaret stories, community leaders wanting to implement her program, military brass interested in making it standard protocol. Emily shook hands until her arm ached and listened to stories until her heart hurt. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. A year after Margaret's conviction, Emily testified at a congressional hearing on veteran reintegration. She sat at a table in a wood-paneled room and answered questions about her program, her experience, what needed to change. Cameras caught every word. The Washington Post ran another article. CNN picked it up. Suddenly, Emily Carter wasn't just the nurse who'd been harassed. She was the veteran changing how America welcomed its soldiers home. The attention was uncomfortable. Emily did interviews because they helped the program, not because she enjoyed them. But she made it clear every time, this wasn't about her. This was about the thousands of veterans who came home to communities unprepared to receive them, about the Margarets who saw difference as threat, about building bridges instead of walls. 2 years after the deployment, Emily stood in her backyard during the annual Ridgewood Grove block party. The neighborhood had changed, more diverse, more intentional, more aware. 3 more veteran families had moved in, all connected to her program. The HOA had been restructured with term limits and transparency requirements. And Margaret's old house was full of laughter, Jason and Mia's daughter playing in the yard, proof that life moved on. Ron appeared at Emily's elbow with a beer. Not bad for a neighborhood that tried to run you out. Emily smiled. Not bad at all. You hear about Margaret? Emily tensed. What about her? Her appeal was denied. She'll serve the full sentence. Ron paused. Linda reached out to her, said Margaret's not doing well. Prison's hard on people like her. Emily took a drink, thinking. Part of her felt vindicated. Part of her just felt sad. She made her choices. Yeah, she did. Ron looked at her. You ever regret staying, fighting back instead of just moving? Emily thought about it. The harassment, the lawsuit, the deployment, the years of work building something from nothing. No, because if I'd left, she would have done it to someone else. And maybe they wouldn't have had the skills to fight back. Maybe they would have just broken. And now? Now she can't hurt anyone. And the program helps people before they get to that breaking point. Emily watched Caleb chase Jason's daughter across the lawn. That's worth what it cost. Later that night, Emily sat on her porch and opened her laptop. Messages from veterans across the country, thanking her for the program, sharing their stories, asking for help. She answered what she could, forwarded the rest to her growing team, and thought about how far this had come from one angry woman who couldn't accept that her neighbor was different. A text came through from Vickers. EOD just approved funding for 50 more communities. Your program's going national. Emily stared at it, the weight of that settling over her. National. Hundreds of communities, thousands of veterans. The scope was staggering. She typed back, We're going to need more staff. Already on it. Proud of you, Carter. Emily set down the phone and looked at her neighborhood. Lights in windows, families settling in, the kind of quiet peace that came from people who decided to build something together instead of tear each other apart. This was what she'd fought for. Not revenge, not vindication, just the simple right to exist in a place that felt like home. Her phone buzzed again. An email this time, from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line made her stomach drop. From Margaret Doyle. Emily almost deleted it. Almost. But something made her open it. Ms. Carter, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding. But my lawyer said I could send one letter and I wanted it to be to you. What I did was wrong. I know that now. I knew it then, if I'm honest, but I convinced myself it was justified, that I was protecting the neighborhood, maintaining standards, keeping things the way they should be. But the truth is I was scared. Scared of change, scared of people I didn't understand, scared of becoming irrelevant. You represented everything I wasn't, brave, capable, certain of your purpose. And instead of learning from that, I tried to destroy it. I'm paying for it now, every day. And I'll keep paying for it for the next 8 years. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because in here, you have a lot of time to think, to see yourself clearly. And what I see isn't pretty. You could have destroyed me. You had every right. But you built something instead. A program that helps people, that changes communities. I read about it in here. Someone left a newspaper article. You took the worst thing that happened to you and made it matter. I don't know if I'll ever be capable of that. But I wanted you to know I see it. I see what you did. And I'm sorry I tried to stop you. Margaret Doyle. Emily read the letter 3 times, her emotions tangled. Anger, because an apology didn't undo the damage. Sadness, because Margaret had wasted so much time and energy on hatred. And something else, not forgiveness exactly, but maybe understanding. Margaret was human, flawed, scared, broken in ways she probably didn't even fully understand. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. Emily saved the letter but didn't respond. Maybe someday she would, maybe not. For now, it was enough to know that Margaret understood what she'd lost, what she'd destroyed in herself by refusing to accept change. Emily closed her laptop and sat in the silence, listening to the neighborhood settle into night. Tomorrow she'd go to the VA hospital where she taught 3 days a week. She'd run her program meetings, review applications from new communities, mentor the veterans who needed guidance. She'd be Lieutenant Carter and Emily, the nurse, and the neighbor who changed everything all at once, because that's what she was now. And she'd be okay with it, because the truth was simple. Belonging wasn't something you waited for permission to claim. It was something you built brick by brick, relationship by relationship, choice by choice. Margaret had tried to take that from her, but Emily had fought back, not with anger or revenge, but by proving that different wasn't dangerous, that change could strengthen instead of threaten, that a neighborhood was only as good as how it treated the people who didn't quite fit. She'd won. Not because Margaret went to prison, but because Ridgewood Grove became the kind of place where someone like Emily could exist without constantly proving her worth, where veterans came home to understanding instead of suspicion, where community meant everyone, not just the people who looked and thought the same. That was the victory that mattered. Emily stood, stretched, and headed inside. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more veterans who needed help finding their way. But tonight, she was home, really home. In a house she'd fought to keep, in a neighborhood she'd helped transform, in a life she'd built one stubborn decision at a time. And that was enough.